Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. Uh, Washington Chapel, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It was the closest church to Bible camp except you guys, but there was no road that went through. So we were there since 1877, and the church started in 1866. We were so sad to see it close, but we were down to 7 members, and then some neighborhood people that attended that didn't even join. And I told one of the ladies, I think COVID kind of got us. We resumed afterwards, but our coffers were empty and our attendance was down, and we were getting pretty elderly, so they made this difficult decision to close. And there's a Brethren church meeting there now, so we were afraid it was going to get bulldozed and farmed. Our neighbor's named Stein, but good people. Born and raised in Perry, and when I was in Scouts, there was an older scout which I looked up to named Ron Harland. I don't know if you've ever heard of any Harlands. He was a senior when I was a freshman, and I was in the class with his younger sister Elaine, who became Dr. Barry, and we were great friends, especially elementary school and all the way through. She took me to Washington Chapel when we were kids just to visit, and my parents were just a little disappointed by the Christian church in Perry, so they started going. And so I credit the Harlan family with getting my family in Church of Christ. And then Elaine was going to Iowa State when I was going to DMAC in Boone, and she said, well, why don't you come down and see the little Bible college Ron and I went to? And so we went down and I visited the Bible college, and because of the Harlans, I went to Bible college for a year. And 4 years later, I had a bachelor's degree and preached full-time in Missouri for 3 years, came back home to Perry, and worked at the lumber yard and so forth. I have 3 daughters. The oldest just turned 44, so it's like, that's too old. And the middle one turns 40 on the 2nd of this coming month. Youngest, I found out Andy lived across the street from, way out on 31st in Perry, and she 36. So they're all getting older, just like me and you. 6 grandkids, so that's kind of fun. I was on the camp board. I met Jim Stocks. If you've been active with the camp, that's been a while now, but he had a son who's also active. We went on the board at the same time. And Larry Arndt, is that right? A contractor, local fellow. We got to know each other. Say it again. Arnberg, yes. I apologize. You can tell how long it's been. Took my kids to camp. They wouldn't go by themselves, just like me. They were pretty quiet. So I always took a week of vacation from the lumberyard and went, and then I got to teach and so forth. So a lot of experience with the camp. I also worked at Camp Matigua. Our family was really big in Scouts. My dad was an Eagle, or a Scoutmaster, and my brothers and I were all Eagle Scouts, so that was a great experience. And then of all things, my middle daughter wanted to do Taekwondo. Eventually they talked me into it, and there was a little group in Perry. And I got my black belt in Taekwondo, and I like to use the word practicing because that's all it is. I'm no athlete, but still doing it in Urbandale. So that's a bit about me. I always told everybody at church the hardest part of a sermon is picking the topic. What am I going to talk about? You want to pick the right one. And so I often let the seasons and the holidays pick that, and so I'm doing that again. Labor Day, we got the long weekend, a day off tomorrow for most. And I kind of liked the little sermon I found. I don't know if we'll get to the last slide, but it gives credit where I found the topic. I didn't make it up. It says, look to the ant. Proverbs 6, go to the ant, you lazy bones. Consider its ways and be wise. Without having any chief or officer or ruler, it prepares its food in summer and gathers its sustenance in harvest. How long will you lie there, O lazy bones? When will you rise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed warrior. So it's encouragement and warning all at once. We're not really going to dwell on that. That's just kind of an introductory background. But be hardworking, industrious, ambitious like the ants. Now, the fellow that wrote this lesson says, in the Caribbean islands, Just like most tropical lands, people tend to move a little more slowly. They don't get in a hurry, as many of us who live in more temperate climates do. And a missionary in Jamaica was noted for her extremely high level of energy. We've all been around that, and maybe some of us are that, a little bit hyper. Go, go, go. A man in the church spoke of it to a visiting American, saying, "Mrs. Herget acts as if work were a virtue." I was like, what's wrong with her? She's just too ambitious. Is that possible? Yeah, there's workaholics. They overdo it. But for the most part, sometimes we tend the other way. We do the minimum. We do what we have to do. But as you look at the topic of work for Labor Day, the Bible teaches us a great deal about work. Now, it's not the most popular topic. Everybody looks forward to retirement, it seems. And then I'll have to admit, the closer I got, the more nervous I got. It's like, yes, I can't wait. Like, oh, yeah, I can wait. Maybe I'll work another year, that kind of thing. And it's been good. It's been good. But it's just quite a transition. It takes a lot of getting used to. But you still work. You still have things to do. In my case, I've been trying to do pulpit supply, fill in when people are needing help for vacation or illness or injury or whatever it might be. And I've even been doing some funerals. As you know, most people are kind of not attending church anymore, like in the old days. And funeral home called and said, "Oh, I hate to ask you this, but this family doesn't have a church, so they don't have a minister. Are you available to do a funeral for them?" So I've been filling in that way too. Sunday sermons and weekend funerals. What's the Bible teach? Well, you've got the Old Testament, and at least a dozen verses in the book of Proverbs alone teach work is a virtue. It's a good thing, something you want to do. I know I put it on one of the slides, but some people say work is a four-letter word, derogatory. No, we don't want to work. We don't like work. But when you're deprived of work, say you hurt yourself or you're fired, all of a sudden you sure wish you could work at that point. Besides the Proverbs, we also have the fourth commandment in the Bible. And often when we read it, we see one thing, but we miss the rest. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day." But it also says, "6 days shall you labor." What do you mean 6? How many people work 6 days? Some people work 7 days a week. Sunrise to sunset. Farmers often, especially in the planting and harvest and so forth. I just want to read Exodus 20. "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that's in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it." Some people don't want to work. Some people don't want to stop working. And those two extremes can be problems. Always, it seems like somewhere in the middle is the ideal. God created rest, and some people don't seem to understand that. So we need downtime. Tomorrow we have a holiday. Not everybody gets it off, unfortunately, just like on weekends, but a majority do. We think of it as the end of summer, one last time to do something fun with the family maybe. Old Testament teachings. In Ecclesiastes, the writer says, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might." So if you're going to do something, do it right. Do it well. So you're proud of it. It gives you a good feeling. Not thinking, "Oh, I hope nobody knows I was the one that did that shoddy workmanship." Well, obviously it's taught in the Old, but it goes over into the New Testament. Many teachings. Number one, Jesus said very simply, "I came to serve, not to be served." We're told to follow in his footsteps, be like him. At the time of instituting of the Lord's Supper, one of the things Jesus did humbling himself, showing his human side, and his servanthood was to wash the disciples' feet. And you remember Peter? He was a little hesitant. One parenthetical note to that is when someone is trying to do service, don't deny them. It's just, I've always thought they have foot washing services quite often Easter time. I've never participated. I always was kind of fascinated. I don't know which would be worse, washing someone's feet or having someone wash my feet. Like, I don't know. It was a custom back then. They were used to it. We're not. It's almost not just strange but creepy in a way, but it's a great exercise for humility. And again, follow in his footsteps. Boy, oh boy. I came to serve, not to be served. Is that our motto? Some people don't go to church or this church or my church or other churches because they're not being fed. They're saying a mouthful there. What are you doing? You know, it's a give and take. If you're not being fed, are you leading a little bit or helping them to come along so that everybody's fed? Or are you feeding them? You know, it's a catch-22, back and forth there. And Jesus also said in Matthew 9, the workers are few. He had just got through saying the harvest is plentiful, it's ready, and we heard at communion time the green corn is turning brown, it's approaching harvest. When it's time to go, what if your combine breaks down? That's bad timing. The harvest is ready and there's no way to get it in out of the field. Jesus is talking spiritually, obviously, but we got to think about, am I serving? Am I planting fruit? Am I gathering the harvest? That's our Christian job. But the workers are few. About 10% take care of most of the work in a church or in any organization. If you name a service organization or Boy Scouts, we found that also. About 10% do 90% of the work. And if you're not backing them up, they're going to get burned out. My dad was an elder at Washington Chapel, and eventually he became the chairman of the board. And between him and my brother, who was a deacon, it was almost like they were taking care of everything. And Dad just got worn out, and so one year, church elections, he says, please don't put my name on the ballot. He was just worn out. And everybody was mystified and shocked, and so he took a year off. I think a little bit to make a point, but also he literally had been overworked. Him and my brother seemed to do all the maintenance and all the this and that, and next year he put his name back on and everything was good. And I think everybody understood. A famous parable Jesus told about an employer asking an important question to some guys just standing around. Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? In Matthew 20. Well, if you remember the parable, the landowner had gone out and hired people way early, sunrise, and he kept coming back during the day and hiring more, lunchtime, middle of the afternoon. There's an hour left to go, and he came out, and that's when he asked the question, how come you're just standing around? It wasn't totally their fault. They were there, ready, willing, and able. No one had hired them. And you remember the controversy then, after he hired them and paid them a full day's wage, the other guys thought they were going to get a really nice bonus because they were there all day through the heat of the day. No, we made a deal. I'm going to give you a day's wage for a day's work. But the point is, why are we standing around? Another parable, they got talents, and one guy buried his to make sure he had that one, but it didn't produce. And some of them produced tenfold and 100-fold. And he was pretty critical of the person that buried his talent. So let your talents come out. Labor in the Lord's vineyard and field. The Apostle Paul said that he himself worked, and I just wanted to read that. Sometimes Paul sounds kind of braggadocious. Be like me, he says sometimes, because I'm like Jesus. That was the important part. Paul says, let me just make sure I've got the verse here. We grow weary from the work of our own hands. And if you do hard work, labor, manual labor, you grow weary. When I worked at Beiser Lumber, I built doors. Actually, I built doors at, let's see here, Jordan Millwork, Mole Millwork, and then Beiser Lumber. And so it was heavy work, heavy lifting. And we had a bench, work bench, and we walked around it all the way. You went and got your parts, the jamb, the threshold, the hinges, and you applied all these. You got a door. Sometimes you had to cut a hole for, they always called them lights, for a window, and on and on. And sometimes it was a double door. Sometimes it had a side light or two side lights, a transom. Sometimes it had cladding. You can imagine how big and heavy those got to be. And so you obviously had help, and they put handles on the side. But still, you were on your feet for 10 hours. There wasn't any air conditioning. So you understand what labor is. Not complaining. We were indoors. No rain, no snow, and so forth. But all we had was a fan blowing on us. It's good for a person, though. Believe it or not, I miss it. Yeah, you were soaked with sweat. But at the end of the day, you had a good feeling, like, what do they call it, the runner's high after you run your mile or 5. You feel good afterwards. The Apostle Paul worked hard, and he said that we should work hard too. Colossians 3 says, whatever your task, put yourself into it, as done for the Lord and not for your master. So if you're an employee for a manager, a supervisor, whatever it is, you're not working for him, you're working for God, and that's a much higher standard. If you have that mentality, you're going to do a much better job. One guy said when the boss was gone, well, we didn't get much done because we had no adult supervision. I thought, well, you are an adult, right? Most of the guys I worked with were about my age. They called us the geriatric crew because we were all gray-haired and gray-bearded. But the boss didn't have to worry. He could leave, and the same amount of work got done because they knew what their jobs were, and it was just a mindset. Not only did Paul use himself as an example and tell others they should work hard, but in Thessalonians, he taught others to work like he did. And I'll just read that. Aspire to live quietly, to mind your own affairs, to work with your hands, as we directed you, so that you may behave properly toward outsiders and be dependent on no one. You remember from time to time, Paul in his missionary journeys, planting churches and then returning to check on them, would sometimes run out of funds. He was living on missionary offerings and gifts and so forth. What did he do? He stopped and he worked a manual labor occupation, tent making. And we think of tent making, that's not so bad. But they used leather. He probably had to tan the hides, clean them, stretch them, scrape them, take the hair off, tan it. That's terribly hard work. And then you just have the material. Then you sew it together. You have to know how to cut it just right. That is very strenuous, hard work. He did it so that he was not a burden to anyone. Pretty good example. He also told us that we should respect those who work. Let me see if I skipped that one. No, I didn't even put it down. In Hebrews, I believe it is, it tells us to respect your elders who work among you, overseeing the flock. So we respect elders, age and office, and at work, employment, your boss. Respect them. Do what's right. And here's the most interesting one. Some people like to quote this quite often. He said that those who would not work, those who refuse, should not eat. That's a little extreme, right? Now we command you, beloved, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to keep away from believers who are living in idleness. For even when we were with you, we gave you this command: anyone unwilling to work should not eat. Well, there's all kinds of things that could be said about that. We're looking at the topic of work. We don't want to get into politics or social construct, but there it is. Paul's words. I assume they were inspired by the Holy Spirit. So, a lot of food for thought. Old Testament teaching, New Testament teaching. In the Bible, we have examples of workers. The Apostle Paul gave himself as an example for the leaders at Ephesus. I think that may have been one of his favorite churches. He spent at least 3 years there, and he returned there on his last journey, on his way to prison. I remember they fell on each other's shoulders and wept. And in the book of Acts it says, I coveted no one's silver or gold or clothing. You know for yourselves that I worked with my own hands to support myself and my companions. In all this I've given you an example that by such work we must support the weak, remembering the words of the Lord Jesus, for he himself said, it's more blessed to give than to receive. So again, great words. What's our job? Care for widows and orphans in Timothy, to help those who are downtrodden. I know there's limits. You can only do so much, but do what you can. And the bottom line is do something. Some people throw up their hands in despair. I can't. There's too many people. I don't have enough money. Yeah, but are you doing what you can do? Even if it's kind of minimal. What was the offering Jesus commended? 2 cents. The widow lady put 2 cents in because it was all she had. That's number one. But sacrificial giving, 2 Corinthians teaches. Jesus gave an example of work. Paul was a tent maker. Jesus was a carpenter. And I've heard some people say, could be like heavy construction, beams, like 4x4, 4x6, 6x6 kind of stuff that he had to carry and put. The other thing I've heard is that word can be translated stonemason. I don't know if it's true or not, but you hear that. So a stone worker, that's all heavy, labor-intensive work. Jesus wasn't just meek and mild, as we sometimes say and visualize him. I can see him as a very strong individual. Jesus was an example of work. He worked in the carpenter shop at Nazareth. He worked as a teacher, itinerant teacher. He walked everywhere. That in itself is hard work. In the heat and a dry environment. He was a miracle worker, a healer. He worked. And so he said in John 5:17, it's pretty simple, I work. That's impressive. No one ever crowded more activity into 3.5 years than Jesus did during his ministry. It was full of work. Well, we're stepping up each time. God himself is an example of work. I was just looking here real quick. Yeah. I didn't want to skip something. Jesus' comment was, my Father works and I work. In John, he talked a lot about doing his Father's will, speaking his Father's words, and the relationship. My Father in heaven, I'm in him and he's in me, and you're in the trio there, if you choose to be. God is introduced to us as a worker. You remember the book of Genesis? How does it begin? 2 words. Well, in the beginning, God created. Activity, action, work. It's not some statement about who God was, his nature, his name. It just jumps right in, full force. All right. And we're winding down, believe it or not. Thanks so much. We're back. My Father works, I work, and God chose busy, hard-working people. Gideon, remember one of the judges? He was called by God when he was threshing wheat. Moses was tending sheep. Saul was working on his father's farm. This is King Saul before he was king. He was also a military man. David also was tending sheep. We think of him as the psalmist of Israel, but I always visualize him playing his harp for his flock. Amos, a minor prophet, was gathering fruit, figs, I believe. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen. And again, all these things were extremely strenuous. We think of fishing with your little rod and reel. It's not very hard. It's relaxing, right? Their fishing was anything but. Typically, they stayed up all night. The heavy nets were drenched with water. And then, remember when they were trying to pull them in? The one time it had such a huge catch that Jesus directed them to. It was breaking the nets and tipping and sinking the boat. That's hard work. Matthew was collecting taxes. I don't know if that was hard work or just very unpopular. You were looked down upon and considered a traitor to your people. And I like how he says this. The only exception was Nathanael, who was sitting under a shade tree when Jesus came to find him. But I like to think he'd been working hard and just stopped to rest a little, right back to work. He was chosen by Jesus, so that's quite impressive. Well, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved by Him, a worker who has no need to be ashamed. That's pretty good advice. Anything you do, work as to God and not your master, your employer. And so the conclusion he has, if work is a virtue, remember the missionary, he thought that lady worked way too hard. What's wrong with her? If work is a virtue, and it is, then what's the opposite? There's two sides of a coin. Laziness must be a sin. Hebrews 6, we want each of you to show the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope to the very end, so that you may not become sluggish, but imitators of those who faith and patience inherit the promises. The title of this, I grew up in a church with the old hymnals and the organ and piano. 2 songs about work. To the Work is the title, and that was one of the old hymns. And another one was, Work, for the night is coming. It's really hard to harvest. Nowadays, I know all the combines and tractors have great big bright lights on them. Not so in the old days, right? My mom grew up in a farm. They farmed with mules. And they pulled a wagon, and they had a bang board, she said, and they threw the cob up, and it hit and came right back in the wagon. They didn't have lights to farm at night. So work changes, but it's still important. Maybe you need to work. Do God's work, heaven's work. Join the army of those who are fighting for the Lord. So quite often we'll offer an invitation, a challenge, a time to rededicate. Maybe you're not working like you used to. I could see my work kind of slowing down when I hit 60 and 62 and 65, and I almost got up to 67, but I had my, I've lost track now, how many years they had to do to have full Social Security. That's what I did. Nowadays, I think they've even bumped it up to 70. Many of the younger people will have to work till they're 70. But don't despair. Keep plugging away. You'll get there. It comes faster than you think. If you'd like to become a Christian, if you'd like to become a better Christian, a worker in the harvest, now is a good time to do that. We will turn it over to the praise people, And I think we have a song for them.